I would like to welcome Paul McCrary, our VP of Program at this time from Green Valley Democrats. He will introduce our guests and watch the chat for questions. Please help us and help us with the Q&A at the end. Paul, please take it away.
Well, thank you, and welcome to our July 10th program. We have a special guest from Tucson, Louise Misztal. She's the Executive Director at Sky Island Alliance in Tucson. Louise has been with that organization for 15 years, she says, and has been the Executive Director for 5 years. She's originally from Evergreen, Colorado, which is just west of Denver, correct? And Louise completed her degrees at the University of Arizona in ecology, evolutionary biology, microbiology, and geographic information systems. Quite a background. The Sky Island area includes southeast Arizona, southwest New Mexico, and northern Mexico. So we are surrounded by parts of that right here. The Sky Island Alliance works to conserve and protect water, land, and wildlife and other things within its ecosystem. Their mission is to protect and restore the diversity of life and lands of the Sky Island region of the United States and Mexico. Louise will explain all that to us and take questions afterward. Louise, we already had a question. What are the Sky Islands?
Yeah, well, I'm going to get into that. So thanks very much for having me this afternoon. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. I've got some wonderful photos. All right, you're seeing my Jaguar there, I hope. Well, good afternoon. Thanks so much for the introduction. I'm going to take you on a little tour of the Sky Islands and hopefully help you understand what they are and how we're living in them and who else lives here, because it's a pretty special place in the world here where we live. And then talk to you about a variety of different work that we're doing and ways that you can get involved here with Sky Island Alliance to keep this special place full of thriving wildlife and beautiful flowing water, which is what we're focused on. So as Paul said, we work to protect and restore the diversity of life and lands in what's known as the Sky Island region of the US and Mexico. And we're really focused on ensuring that nature thrives, open space and clean water are available to all, and that people like all of us here are connected to this region and know where we live and that it enriches our lives. So what are Sky Islands? They are these forested mountain islands that are surrounded by desert and grassland seas. So they're these special habitats with pine and conifer and oak up at the high elevations, rising up to 10,000 feet even. And then with this really different habitat in between with grassland and deserts. And this is a view of the Catalina Mountains outside of Tucson, which is a Sky Island. The Santa Rita Mountains that you all are near is also a Sky Island. So there's lots of different habitats and beautiful oak woodland and pine trees and all of that in these mountain islands. And to give you a little better idea of where we are in the world and what's going on here. So you can see here the Sky Island region outlined in red, and the Sonoran Desert, the Chihuahuan Desert, the Sierra Madre, the Rocky Mountains, all these ecosystems are coming together here in this spot. And these islands are sort of this place where these large mountain range chains taper off, and we get these isolated individual mountains. And so that means a lot of interesting things for wildlife and habitats. This is a world-renowned biodiversity hotspot, meaning there's a really wide diversity of plants and animals found here. There's a lot of topographic diversity. And in terms of conservation, there's a lot of diversity in land ownership and a really complex picture of the land here. And here's another look at the Sky Islands. So as Paul mentioned, we're looking at southeastern Arizona, a little bit into New Mexico and Chihuahua, and then Sonora. So there's about 55 Sky Island ranges in what's known as the Sky Island region. And actually most of them are in Mexico, with 32 in Mexico. And here's another look just to give you an idea of this notion of these forested green mountains popping up out of the grassland and deserts. So you can see where we are in the world in the Sky Islands. So this is, as I said, a really special place in the world. It's the only place where jaguar and black bear live together in the same canyon habitats. There's an incredible amount of different kinds of plant life here. These are just some examples. And we get this really interesting mix of subtropical species like the elegant trogon here, you see here, and the thick-billed parrot, and more what we think of as more northern and temperate species. And amazingly, places in the Sky Island like the San Pedro River is a great example. It is home to 365 different species of birds. So there's this real amazing concentration of life here. I think we've got 12 different hummingbird species in the region. And many birds, nearly half the birds in species in North America spend part of their lifetime here. So that's pretty amazing. I'm a birder myself, so this is a favorite part of the region for me. There's 120 reptile species and 26 amphibian species. Hopefully all of you are getting to see some of these in your backyards and out hiking from a safe distance. And then of course our beautiful, charismatic mammal species. So we've got 114 mammal species in the region. Some of our favorites are this beautiful jaguar and the coati. So these guys are pretty amazing. This is a closer look at a ringtail, also known as cacomistle in Espanol. This is a hognose skunk. We've got 4 species of skunk in the region, all 4 found in North America. Pretty cool. One of our favorites, the coati, little black bear, and an ocelot. This is a really special tropical cat that is found in this region. There's one currently living in the Huachuca Mountain area, a little south east of where you all are. And of course, our very majestic and thrilling jaguar. This is a photo taken of a jaguar just a little south of the US-Mexico border in a Sky Island mountain range there at a place called El Aribabi Ranch, where there's protected habitat for these critters. And we like to think about the jaguar when we think about the Sky Island region and how do we keep this place connected and thriving. Jaguars need a lot of room to roam. They need connectivity, so safe open space that they can move between. They need water, food to find mates, so other jaguars. And if we do the work it takes to keep jaguars thriving in this region and help them recover, as they've been doing in the last decade or so here in Southern Arizona, then we're doing really well for a wide diversity of species in this region. So we think about the path of the jaguar, as we like to call it, and where these jaguar need to move around between safe open space to get to food and water. And you can see here, I'll talk about, of course, what's going on with the US-Mexico border. You can see that these animals are a perfect example of the connectedness between the US and Mexico. We've got lots of protected open space in Arizona. That's wonderful habitat for jaguars. And if we can protect the pathways that jaguars need to keep returning into the US from their breeding population, that's right now in northern Sonora, then we can recover jaguars here in the Sky Islands, which is pretty amazing to be living in a place where jaguars are roaming. So our work is focused on keeping wildlife thriving and water flowing in the face of a number of different threats and challenges. One of those is roads and human development. You can see here's roads in Southern Arizona. And this is a map that shows influence of roads on the land. So a lot of human development that affects many different animals and severs their pathways. So that's a part of the focus of our work. This is a look at the US-Mexico border where construction has been ongoing under the Trump administration really rapidly for the last year or so before he was elected. Before Biden was elected. Thank goodness. So this is has been a big area of our focus that I'll talk more about. But the Sky Islands are really this continental crossroads of species. Lots of species migrate through here. And so the border wall that has been constructed is a really major threat to survival of animals, recovery of jaguar, and the connectivity of this amazing region. So you can see how these kinds of barriers would just be stopping wildlife in their tracks as they try to get to water and habitat. This is at the Coronado National Memorial in the Huachuca Mountains, on the east side of the Huachuca Mountains, where we have some work going on that I'll talk to you a little bit more about. Another big issue that we're thinking about and addressing with our work is climate change in the Sky Islands. We felt this really deeply last year with the terrible drought we've been in that was then piled on with a very poor monsoon and some extreme heat. And so just overall, water's becoming more scarce in the region. We're seeing increased intensity in wildfire. I'm sure you're all aware of these issues, but we want to think about how we help wildlife and ecosystems adapt and persist into the future with all these challenges of climate change. So we do this work by focusing on water, studying, protecting, and enhancing water sources, wildlife, conserving them, ensuring they have open space and habitat to move around and survive. Really importantly, people like all of you, so helping inspire and empower people to connect with and care for the Sky Islands. And then we are truly an alliance. It's a big region. We're 9 staff. So we do a lot of work in collaboration with entities like the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management and universities, and also with volunteers. They're a really important part of our work and being able to help protect the Sky Islands. And so we do a combination of collecting information. So I'll talk a lot about that. We have to know who's out there and where they're living in terms of wildlife and plants in order to protect them and take action to restore their habitat. We do advocacy work. The border wall is a great example of that. We need to speak up and ask our elected representatives, which you all are very familiar with, to take action on behalf of this special place and ensure there's protections in place for wildlife and clean water and connectivity for wildlife. And then we work with volunteers to actually get out on the land, do things like plant plants in places where pollinators need more native plants, pull out invasive plants that are harming ecosystems, and just get folks involved hands-on in helping protect this place. So working with lots of different partners, I really already walked us through this, and the volunteers. So we have, in big years, we'll have 600 volunteers giving up to 10,000 hours of donated time to do work in the US and Mexico. Last year was a little different, but we've done a lot of adapting, and volunteering is still a core piece of our ability to protect the Sky Islands going forward. So we hope some of you will be inspired to join us. So water, let's start with water. I know I'm thinking about it a lot in these hot summer days, and I'm thankful to be in a cool spot with lots of water, but not all critters are. So water's really important for wildlife that are moving around on the landscape to get a drink, to jump in and cool off. Bears love to jump in springs and puddles around the Sky Islands. And so we think a lot about water sources and how we can protect really important ones on the landscape, bring ones that are no longer flowing back to flowing health. And a big focus of our work is spring ecosystems. So springs are places where groundwater comes to the surface of the earth, typically from the aquifer. If you didn't know, Arizona is a really amazing place for springs. It's the second driest state in the nation, but has the highest number of springs in the US. Springs are really special in terms of how much biological diversity they harbor and support. They may be important climate refugia, and they support many different species and ecological processes. So they have this really big influence on the land. And then many of them, as you can imagine, have been altered for human use. And amazingly, when we started this work, it's been about 10 years ago now, there was a lot of unknowns about springs. A lot hadn't been visited recently, so we didn't know if there was still water there or not. And so last year we launched a new approach to our spring survey and protection program called Spring Seeker. And so I'll tell you a little bit about that. So springs in the Sky Islands are concentrated in the mountains, but they're also in major river valleys. There's about 4,000 known in the US. We're working on also mapping springs in Mexico. So there's likely a similar amount in the Mexico portion of the region. And we've been working with volunteers for many years to go out to springs and survey them. So understand how much water is there, what's the condition of the spring. And over the past 5 or 6 years, we've surveyed well over 300 springs in the US and Mexico. And springs come in all different shapes and sizes. This is a spring outside near Kartchner Caverns State Park, McGrew Spring. Some of them are really tiny, but still very important. We found a rare plant at this spring in the Patagonia Mountains. There's different types of springs. Some springs emerge in a channel, like if you think of a creek bed, they pop out in a creek bed. This is a really common type of spring in the Sky Islands. And here's some examples. And some springs come out right out of the side of the hill called hill slope springs. And sometimes these springs are the start of a stream in the mountains. Really interesting, special springs. This is a hill slope or a hanging garden in Aravaipa Canyon, a really special spot. And then you probably heard of cienagas, these wet meadow habitats. So this is another type of spring that's pretty prevalent in the Sky Islands. And our high elevation cienagas, many of them are still intact. We've lost many of our low elevation cienagas. The San Pedro River is a great example. It used to have areas of big cienega habitat where many springs were creating this kind of wet meadow near the river ecosystem, and much of that's been lost due to draining and human development. Hanging garden is another type of spring, really gorgeous, coming out of sort of rock walls, lots of interesting plants at these spots. So you can see how all these different types of springs create different habitats and can be really important for our amphibians and our wide-ranging animals like jaguar and black bear. Here's a little turtle at this spring in the Whetstone Mountains called Nogales Spring. And we pretty much talked through this. One other thing about springs that's interesting is we do find endemic species at springs, which means an animal that's really only found in that particular special habitat. And a spring snail is a great example of that. There's some special snails that live only right at where a spring emerges out of the earth, and we've got some of those species here in the Sky Islands. Of course, our wonderful charismatic mammals use springs to drink water. So really important part of the ecosystem. And we love to document where wildlife are with wildlife cameras. So I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. I thought I'd fill you up with fun, fuzzy critters on a Saturday afternoon. So here's a look at a little garter snake and a rattlesnake. Again, our bear taking a bath in the spring. Springs are really important for lots of different invertebrates, insects, and this is important, of course, for birds because insects are food for birds. So important spots for diversity of insects, and all different kinds of amazing species are found only where they can keep their feet in waters, like the scarlet monkey flower, cottonwoods, walnut. Canyon grape is a great example. Maidenhair ferns are a beautiful plant that we see at these hanging garden springs. So springs, face a number of threats in the region. A main one is flow regulation or development. So like I said, they're often developed for human use, either home use or livestock, which often means that animals can no longer get to them, or they're not making water on the land where plants can have their feet in water and create habitat. There's issues with mining and surface water quality. Roads and trails often lead to springs or near them, which can damage springs. I mentioned cattle development, and cattle go really hand in hand. And there's a combination of the issue of the development for cattle, but also cattle grazing down all the little young shoots of things that are coming up, which starts to reduce the diversity of life at these spots. And then, of course, drought and the warming climate. We've been seeing a trend of visiting springs that are now dry, that didn't used to be, which is something we want to keep a close eye on and have a really good understanding of across the region, so we can protect springs that are still flowing. And then fire is definitely affecting springs as well. The Bighorn fire that happened in the Catalina Mountains last summer is a big area of focus for us right now. We've got students and volunteers out in the Catalinas pre some of this monsoon rain, surveying springs, because springs can be, when fire burns through and habitat upstream from a spring burns up, erosion when it starts to rain can fill in springs and obliterate them. And so we're taking a good look at the springs in the Catalinas to do what we can to protect springs from getting obliterated and help get them back on their feet, so to speak, so that they continue to have surface water for all the critters that depend on them. So Spring Seeker is one way you can get involved with us if you're a hiker, if you're out and about. Last year, we brought all of our spring survey work into this mobile phone app. So this is a smartphone app that's basically a simple survey you can do with instructions right when you're in the field. It works fine in the field, even without cell service. And we've gotten hundreds of surveys this way at springs in the last year. So this has been a real success for us, and it was really wonderful to have people out and about, even with COVID, when they were going out hiking anyways on their own or with their family, to be able to get some information about springs, because we often see them out hiking. And of course, like all of our work, we want to do things with this information. So we take the information we're collecting about springs through mapping and surveying and put it into stewardship and monitoring activities. And the stewardship piece is really important. Understanding where they are, of course, and then understanding, like I said, where the most important springs on the landscape are. So where is there flowing water and good habitat that we can protect? Where are there threats that we might be able to address with restoration work or erosion control work? And then we also work on restoration projects and have put out guidance in partnership with the Spring Stewardship Institute and the Desert Landscape Conservation Cooperative to help other folks who steward springs restore them. And of course, hundreds of people are how we make this work happen. So wonderful volunteers, and we'd love to have you along. I'll talk really quickly about this beautiful place, Aravaipa Creek and Aravaipa Canyon, which is a Bureau of Land Management area, wilderness area, where we've been working. Here's a look at where it is. So in addition to the springs, we think about other water sources, creeks and rivers in the region. This is a spot where vinca, an invasive plant, is spread across an area around this flowing creek where there's 7 native fish species. And so we want to protect the hydrology of the creek and ensure that there's plenty of flowing water and good native food habitat for pollinators and other wildlife. And we've been working with volunteers there for nearly a decade now, removing vinca along the creek. Really fun work, also really hard work, I'll be honest. And then planting native plants where we've cleared out the vinca, which is the really fun part. And so we're doing this work in special spots around the Sky Islands. And this, like I said, special place in terms of biological diversity. There's a leopard frog here, lowland leopard frog. Actually, it might be a Chiricahua leopard frog, and a garter snake and a scorpion. And again, really driven by volunteers, people just like you that come out and help us do this work. I'm going to skip this bit just for time and talk about wildlife. So wildlife is a big part of our focus. One of our recent programs we launched is Sky Island Photo Fauna. And this is a really fun one that I hope some of you might already be participating in or join us in participating. So we're working with volunteers that manage their own cameras in their own backyard throughout the Sky Island region to collect regular information about wildlife, about 43 different species that are present in the region, to understand when and where they're moving, the success of urban adapted species, so how certain animals are doing living near human development. We want to understand of the persistence of species unique to the Sky Island region across the region, and then also where species that are more sensitive to human development are thriving. And we love using wildlife cameras in our work in photo fauna and our border wildlife study, which I'll tell you about, because it limits stress on animals. It saves people's time. We can check cameras and get a lot of information at one time. They're out there all the time, you know, being triggered by animals moving in front of them. And so we can observe behavior, which is always really fun and interesting. And then we get all this information that helps us track trends over time, which is important for conservation. So cameras, if you're not familiar, when an animal walks in front of one of these wildlife cameras, it's either triggered by motion during the day, or at nighttime, the heat of the animal triggers the camera to go off. And here's a look at some of the places we have folks participating in our photo fauna program. So you can see we've got a good spread across the region, hoping to get some more over time in Sonora and some more in eastern Arizona to get a really nice coverage of the entire region. And here's some of the species we're looking at. So thinking about migratory species like the elf owl, one of my favorites, the smallest owl in the world that spends their summers here with us. Urban adapted species like bobcats that we often see around Tucson, and I imagine you see them around Green Valley. Endemic species like the Gila monster and Gould's turkey. Wide-ranging species like mountain lion and black bear, and this pronghorn pictured here that's found down in the San Rafael Valley. And subtropical species, so the coati is a great example of that. Again, those species that are kind of at the northern end of their range here in the Sky Islands, contributing to all this diversity of life. And sensitive species like badger, who's one of our favorites lately, that don't do well with human development. And so folks are reporting in on these checklists and sending in photos each month to us. Oh, we've got a video of our badger friends. These badgers are being spotted on the east side of Tucson near the national park boundary, Saguaro National Park. So really fun to see these critters living and thriving on the edge of urban habitat. Got a coyote. And then just what we've been doing with this program for fun is you can enter your a photo or a few photos into our Best of Photo Fauna contest. This was the winner for last year. And you can join a sign up for our Photo Fauna field notes if you're interested in this project and learning more about wildlife in the region, and stay up to date on what we're up to and participate and learn about who we're seeing on our cameras, like this hungry raccoon who couldn't contain himself before he even got a hold of the feeder. We're doing this work with lots of partners. Again, the alliance piece of things, it takes a village. Lots of different wonderful organizations are participating with their own cameras, and we'd love to have you participate as well if you're interested. Our 1,000 Cats project just launched this year. We're excited about this. The focus here, of course, is cats, our large cats that suffer from some human persecution and troubles with development and the border wall for our jaguars and ocelots. And so there's a lot we can do as individuals and a community in the region to help these cats thrive. And so in collaboration with the Photo Fauna Project and other work, we're trying to bring some attention to these special cats that live here and how to conserve them. And just as an example, we're looking at where we're seeing these cats across the region through the Photo Fauna Network and sharing ways people in their own backyards can be supportive of cat conservation. So now I'll talk to you a little bit about our border wildlife study. And I see some questions in the chat. I'll come back to those in just a minute around the water piece. So last year, as border wall construction in the Sky Islands was accelerating, we launched a study, a border wildlife camera study, in one of the last remaining open pathways for wildlife in the Patagonia Mountains, San Rafael Valley, and Huachuca Mountains. So this was an area that was still very permeable to wildlife. This is a view from the top of Montezuma Pass in the Huachuca Mountains, looking out toward, you can actually see Mexico off to the right. All this connected habitat here into looking off toward the San Rafael Valley. Some of this beautiful rolling grassland hill. And even here where you can see some fencing, border fencing on the right in the San Rafael Valley, this fencing is still very permeable to wildlife trying to move across the landscape. And in the Patagonias, it's still a barbed wire fence, or it was here at this spot. But border wall construction was closing in on either side of this corridor. And we thought it was really important to understand truly the community of wildlife living here, share these photos and who's here with the world to bring attention to how important this open corridor is for many different animals. And we did that by putting out 58 cameras in this area I showed you on the map. And also we had 10 cameras, well, we still do, in northern Mexico on a protected parcel of land that connects to this corridor. And over the last year, we've gathered 2 million photos with 12,000 wildlife images within those and 6,300 independent detections. So lots of information coming in, and you can see all the amazing different animals we've been getting photos of. We've been getting an amazing amount of birds. These are some kestrels in the San Rafael Valley. Here's a deer, I believe in the Patagonias with the lights of Nogales in the background. A bobcat. North American porcupine. This was a really exciting photo for us to get. Not a lot of is known about their status right now in this area. And so we've been really happy to be continuing to see photos of these porcupines in the study area. It's a great horned owl landing on a log. This bobcat was wondering what the heck was going on with this camera. And you notice this is a ringtail. A lot of these mammal photos are at night. So we're seeing a lot of animal movement at night. And that's something we can look at when we gather this kind of information. When are animals most active? You know, who's moving around when? Are certain kinds of certain animals showing up in one place more than another? There's a gray fox. And here's a look at some of the many different birds. We got a lizard there in the lower left-hand side. It's a Clark's spiny. We've been getting butterflies on these cameras. So really just an amazing amount of information about who's living in this important corridor at the US-Mexico border. Seeing lots of mammals. This was a favorite for us to capture this hummingbird on camera like this, broad-billed hummingbird. And like I said, understanding, you can see here that we're getting a lot more observations in the Patagonia Mountains. And so we can see that that's a really important corridor that's connecting across the US-Mexico border. But of course, all of this open area is really important. It's a place where the jaguar that is in the US now may have entered the US from Mexico, and most likely El Jefe came through this, who was living in the Santa Ritas for a number of years, came through this corridor as well. Some more fun critters. That's a spotted skunk in the upper left. We've got our porcupine friend again. A Mexican opossum in the lower right. Another really fun critter that's at the northern end of its range here in the Sky Islands. And so we've recorded, I think now 104 wildlife species and counting. This study's ongoing. It's really important at this point, now that border construction seems to have mostly halted, that we continue this monitoring and use this information to start guiding border restoration efforts. So we are working with a coalition of many organizations to track what is going on with the government around border wall funding. That's one thing I did want to share with all of you. I don't have an action for you to take right now, but we're keeping an eye on additional appropriations of money for border wall and trying to stop that and redirect money toward restoration. There's a lot we can do right away to help with these areas that have been walled off, to restore places like the San Pedro River and the Huachuca Mountains, where some of this border wall construction that really was ramping up in January, shortly before Biden was inaugurated, there was a lot of damage done on the east side of this corridor that we've been studying. A lot of push to do border wall construction. And so there's a lot of need for getting out there and restoring this, controlling the erosion and replanting native plants to get this corridor back to functioning as best we can. I think that's all I'll say about that. So yes, our focus has been since the beginning of this year on Not Another Foot. We've been doing a lot of advocacy work to get the Biden administration to halt construction and start looking toward recovery at the border. And we'll continue to advocate for and work this year towards prioritizing areas for restoration and raising awareness about this, trying to ensure no more border wall is built anywhere in this region to keep this really vital last remaining corridor open. Another piece of our work around conserving wildlife is work in Sonora. I'll just touch on this briefly. So in Sonora, we're working with private landowners, so ranchers. And the work looks different there because it's door to door with different individuals in terms of how we do the work, but it's the same work with mapping springs, understanding how much water is there, understanding wildlife that's present on people's ranches, finding shared goals around conservation and their livelihoods, and then helping to get these places protected. And part of this work we do through what's known as the Sister Parks program, a really great program with the National Park Service, where they partner up national parks in the United States with those in Mexico or Canada. Our Saguaro National Park outside of Tucson is Sister Parks with a couple of protected areas in Sonora. And Coronado National Memorial that I've been talking about, where we're working on the border wildlife study, is connected with Ajos Bavispe in Sonora, which is a really important protected area in Sonora. I see a question about what response we get from landowners. We've had a really wonderful response. We've signed agreements with 8 different landowners to work with them on their land to develop some conservation projects. We've started a couple of those. And one of the really great tools in Mexico are voluntary conservation area designations. And so that's something we work with ranchers to see if they're interested and help them work on securing that for their place. So the last little bit I'll talk about is connecting people to the region. One program that we're really excited about the last couple of years is our binational internship program. So we're committed to fostering the next generation of conservationists in the Sky Island region. And it's really going to require folks who think about it as a whole region and understand the international conservation issues. And so we last year launched this program amidst COVID, all online, and it worked out really wonderfully. And we're happy to be welcoming 7 new interns this summer, working with the Universidad de la Sierra in Mexico, the Tohono O'odham Community College, and the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program in the US to do a whole field and curriculum program with these folks through the summer. This has been a real uplifting part of our work the last year or so. So I invite you to take part. I think you're seeing there's lots of ways to get involved. A great first step is to sign up for our emails and join our coffee breaks. So every couple of weeks on Thursdays, we do informational programs like this one about bobcats in Tucson that we'd love to have you join if you're interested. And our tracker goes out every 2 weeks as well with information about what we're learning and what we're up to. There's lots of ways to volunteer with Photo Fauna, Spring Seeker, and there will be additional restoration projects coming to fruition this year that we'll need lots of help with. Advocating on behalf of the Sky Islands, of course, is important. We're going to need, if you sign up for our email, we'll let you know when there's action alerts, when there's when it's time to call your senators or your representatives and ask them to vote yes or no on things and support, money for restoration for the border and those kinds of things. And of course, we do this work with funding from many individuals who support the work. So we always appreciate folks who support us with donations as well. So I'm going to stop and see about questions here. I do see there's a couple questions already in the chat around what actions are needed to restore springs and creeks. So I'll start with that if that's okay, Paul. With springs and creeks, some of the actions are invasive species can be a big problem, and often invasive species like arundo or the vinca I talked about suck up a lot more water than native species. So getting those invasive species out of there, getting a mix of native plants back in. In a lot of places, erosion is a big problem. It's a legacy of cattle grazing and other development. And so slowing the water down with rock structures, slowing water down that's coming into springs and creeks from side channels with rock structures and erosion control can be important. And lots of need for just also really protecting these areas from any further development or loss of water. And then there was a question about BLM and protecting Aravaipa Canyon. So Aravaipa Canyon, most of it is in the Aravaipa Canyon wilderness. So in terms of land protection, it's actually very well protected. But you bring up the issue of cattle, and there is cattle grazing on the uplands around Aravaipa Canyon, which certainly does affect the habitat. So that is an area that could change. Cattle ranchers fill cattle tanks affect the survivability of springs. So cattle are a big challenge with springs, depending on how water is pumped and stored and managed around cattle. It can be a situation where there's really nice spring habitat and cattle can also get to water, or it can be a situation like some of the photos you saw where it's really a mucked up mess and there's no wildlife habitat, and animals like Chiricahua leopard frogs can't get into the water to use it to breed. And so we want to identify those places where we can make better habitat for wildlife at springs and ensure that they can get in the water, drink the water, and have what they need in addition to the use for cattle.
All right, Louise, you gave us a lot of wonderful information, and people can see your email, louise@skyislandalliance.org, correct?
Yep.
And the website is skyislandalliance.org also. You have a phone number that you can tell us so we can put in YouTube?
Oh, sure. It's 520
520
461
461
7664.
7664. Is that the only number, or do you have another?
That's the best number.
That's the main one. Okay.
Yep.
Very good. So if anybody has a question, you can either do chat or raise your hand.
Yeah, your cat study in the Tucson mountains, can that be expanded to other places? I live in Corona de Tucson, and we are on the outer side of a a development, and we've had bobcats here since we moved here, and descendants of, and babies, and there's multiple pictures showing up on our community page, and I'm wondering if the bobcat counts could be expanded to other areas, not just the Tucson Mountains, or maybe you've already done it.
Yeah, so actually with our photofauna program and 1,000 Cats, it's really region wide. So yes, we want coverage region wide, and we would love if you have or working with folks that have wildlife cameras, or you have your own. We'd love for you to join the photofauna program and help us understand what's going on in your neck of the woods. There's more information on our website, and I also put Anna Sophia, our communications manager, her email up here. She can help with connecting you with volunteer opportunities. So yes, we'd love to see that information. That would be wonderful.
All right, Lois Connell has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, from what you're describing about your activities to trying to restore the water viability, sounds very labor intensive. And it would seem to me you got to pull out the invasive plants, and that can be quite challenging because you have to make sure you get all of it.
Yep.
You know, if you leave a piece of a root there, it's just going to come back. And the other thing then is replanting indigenous plants. So I mean, it just sounds labor intensive. And looking at the pictures, it doesn't look like you have that large of a volunteer group. So I'm wondering, how many people do you have that volunteer to do that kind of the heavy physical labor that's required? And can you give an estimate? I mean, if it's like it takes X long per acre or per other area to accomplish that?
Yeah, well, you're right. It's a lot of work to pull Vinca out. And things have changed a lot about how we're doing that work in the last year because of COVID. So before COVID, we were getting groups of folks in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 people, which is still a pretty small group. But part of the thing is we're working right along the banks of the creek. So it's kind of sensitive habitat, and we really want to do it by hand if at all possible. And we're working with other partners that are using other methods on some of the bigger areas further away from the creek. But what we have been doing the last couple of years is also working with fire crews and like the Arizona Conservation Corps crews. So helping fund them to do some of the work. They're amazing. They can get in there and get a lot done in a couple of weeks. In terms of like how long it takes to do the work, you know, we'll take on a project that spans a year or 2 years and be trying to clear a half to a mile of creekside habitat of Vinca. So you're absolutely right. It's a lot of work. But we're making lots of progress, which is encouraging. So you get in there and do that work and get the native plants in, and you can really see the difference over time with the work.
Louise, there are a couple other chat questions there. I can read them or you can. Is the Vinca the same variety that we plant at our home flower gardens?
Yes, it is. I know it has beautiful flowers and makes a nice ground cover, but yes, it is. And all the Vinca that's in Aravaipa is escaped from, there's homesteading sites in there where people had homes and planted it, and now it's escaped from those yards. So yes, no good if you're in a riparian area to let that Vinca get out of your yard. And then I see Jean Vickers is asking if we need volunteers to grow native plants from replanting areas. You know, right now we're working with the Gila Watershed Partnership has a wonderful native plant nursery. And then another organization, Borderlands Restoration Network, also has a really wonderful native plant nursery. So we're pretty set, and it's kind of a big scale of grow out. So right now we're not working with volunteers to grow native plants, but thank you for asking. You
mentioned the Aravaipa Canyon a couple of times. What's the easiest way to get there? It sounds like a great place.
So Well, it's a BLM wilderness, so you can certainly Google Aravaipa Canyon BLM wilderness. It's about 3 hours from Tucson, so you go east on I-10 to Wilcox, and then north out of Wilcox. I don't remember the dirt road, but there was a slide in my presentation that actually had a map on it that I could share with you all.
Okay, sounds like a good place to go.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous spot. We're working on the east side. You can enter from the east side or the west side. The west side's a little bit easier to get to. You go north up the 77 through Mammoth to get to Aravaipa from the west side.
All right, any other questions or any other comments? This is your chance. Louise is a fantastic presenter, did a great job. Thanks, Louise. Great presentation from Rebecca Hinton. I don't know what else to tell you except for
That's all right.
people like you.
Thank you, Louise. We really appreciate your presentation. It was fantastic. It got me to thinking I want to get back out in the forest more. I would like to thank everybody for attending today.
Thanks for being here, Louise. Couldn't have been any better. Well, maybe, I don't know. 99.5%, but you were great.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.